So I'm going to start my presentation, and I will like to start by saying what I'm going to discuss with you today is specifically on how the promotion of the tax transparency and international cooperation through the two standards, exchange of information on request and automatic exchange of information, have been able to enhance taxpayer compliance and also promoting the fairness of the tax systems, and finally, enhanced compliance and equitable distribution of the tax burden boost revenue collection. So I think we can move to the next slide, please, and then the next one, because I think I have already passed through that. The idea of promoting tax transparency and international cooperation through the two standards is what has been driving the Global Forum and specifically its Secretariat to support our members in tackling the offshore tax evasion. And we do it by monitoring, reviewing, and assisting jurisdictions in the implementation of these two main standards that I mentioned before. In terms of exchange of information on request, we are talking here specifically about tax authorities making specific requests for information that will allow them to progress on their tax investigations and audits. And to do so, the first requirement of this standard is that the information exists, is transparent, and is available and accessible. So it means the information concerning the legal and beneficial ownership of entities and arrangements, as well as accounting and banking records. In terms of the automatic exchange of information, we are talking mainly here about automatic exchange of financial account information, and it allows for periodic, standardized and automatic exchange of information on the financial accounts of non-residents to their jurisdictions of residence without any prior request for this information. And both standards help jurisdictions ensure that everyone pays their fair tax of taxes, and thus it contributes to the overall trust in the tax system as well as to revenue mobilization. So moving to the next slide. Building then on the exchange of information infrastructure and using exchange of information tools effectively enable jurisdictions to enhance the detection and prevention of tax evasion and avoidance, reduce the illicit financial flows, increase revenues that are fundamental for governments to fund their own development, improve the perception of the fairness of the tax systems, level the playing field for both business and governments around the globe, and strengthen international cooperation and trust amongst jurisdictions. So going to the next slide, the tax transparency and exchange of information enables tax authorities obtaining information on their taxpayers' affairs abroad. And this is done automatically or upon request, as I mentioned. And the results are very impressive. For example, in 2022 alone, the exchange of information on request has enabled tax authorities to send 26,600 requests for information to support their own tax investigations and audits. And automatic exchange of information has enabled the tax authorities to receive information on more than 123 million of financial accounts, and it covers a total assets of almost 12 trillion of euros around the globe. And the possibility for the tax authorities to obtain the information held abroad deters non-compliance, as the taxpayers they tend to change their own behavior because they know the risk of being caught is higher. So we have several studies that have shown how the tax transparency has had an impact on taxpayers' behavior and on the transparency around the globe. For example, in 2019 OECD study found that on aggregate, the move to automatic exchange of financial account information has triggered a reduction in the amount of deposits held in offshore financial centers by 22%. And how this happened is also through the change in taxpayer behavior. And another example is giving the voluntary disclosure programs that are usually associated with the implementation of the exchange of information standards. The immediate impact of these voluntary disclosure programs is that some assets and some income that had not been reported becomes known by the tax authorities, and also it has a long-term increase in the domestic revenues, as these taxpayers would start reporting, or because the new assets, the assets that actually are not new, but they were not reported before, they will be continue to be reported, and the income associated with these assets will be reported in the future as well. So there is a long-term impact in the compliance of taxpayers. So this also has an impact on additional revenues in the moment and in the future. The effective use of this information obtained from abroad gives the tax authorities appropriate means to promote compliance through the tax audits, tax investigations, but also through other compliance activities. For example, pre-filing tax returns, nudge letters, requests for cross-border assistance in the recovery of tax claim that was just mentioned in the previous panel that we had here. So we have several impacts on the use of the tax transparency to improve taxpayers' compliance. I'm going to move to the next slide, and this is just to show you a bit the figures associated with that. This pyramid shows that actually most taxpayers comply with the tax rules. There are non-compliant taxpayers, of course, but then these non-compliant taxpayers, they can be divided into two categories. Despite being a smaller number of taxpayers, the first group of these non-compliant taxpayers are composed by those who are non-compliant, but that are particularly sensitive to the growing risk of detection, and then can be encouraged to become compliant. The fact that they know the information held abroad can be accessed by the tax authorities has an impact on them and on their behavior. So if offered the possibility of voluntarily complying with the tax rules, this group seems willing to correct their situation and to align with the tax laws. The second group of the non-compliant taxpayers are those who have made an informed decision to evade their tax obligations, and they will actively be seeking alternative strategies to just to not comply and avoid paying the due taxes. Despite being a smaller group of taxpayers, they require a lot of proactive enforcement actions by the tax administrations. And the survey that we have seen in the latest years by the Global Forum is that the jurisdictions that have implemented this voluntary disclosure mechanisms, they have helped identify more than 90 billion of euros through these initiatives, and they have also gained benefits, in particularly before the commencement of the first automatic exchange of information. A large number of taxpayers have decided to become compliant and have made use of this opportunity to have a reduction in their penalties and have reported their assets abroad and have paid their due taxes. So you can see in the graphic that these figures are especially high in 2016 and 17 because of the starting of these exchanges of automatic financial account information. However, for the latest group of taxpayers, the one that I mentioned, those taxpayers that have decided to not to comply with their tax obligations, jurisdictions are more and more using the information they are getting from abroad to enhance the ability to detect non-compliance and to fight it. So the use of the data obtained automatically from the financial account held abroad has already helped identify more than 4 billion of euros in additional revenue. And the use of exchange of information on request, meaning to support tax investigations, has also helped raise more than 12.8 billion of euros since the beginning of exchange of information on request through the Global Forum. So I mean, since 2009. I want to call your attention that these figures, they are only indicative and they do not reflect the full gains from increased tax transparency. First, because the Global Forum survey does not capture all the revenues identified, as only around 40% of our members are tracking the additional revenues that are associated with the tax transparency standards. Also, because of the variety of use that the CRS data can take, it's difficult to identify directly the revenue impact of how you use the data. And of course, at the end of the day, the behavior change and the associated revenue gains because the taxpayers become more compliant. They are not captured here as well, because if the taxpayer just comes and voluntarily report the revenue, not through this these voluntary disclosure programs, then it's difficult to track whether this is associated to the risk or their change in behavior. Going to the next slide. I want to provide you an example of a country that has used tax transparency to improve tax compliance, and Ecuador did it specifically using the CRS data, the automatic exchange of information data. So Ecuador adopted a strategy that was basically based on three elements. First was the voluntary disclosure programs. And in this particular case, the taxpayers that adhered to the program, they benefited from a reduction on the tax rate and would not be subjected to proceedings for the taxes that were declared through this program, nor to administrative penalties, fines, or interest. So the second action was a mass control. The Internal Revenue Service of Ecuador used mail communication to persuade the taxpayers to come and regularize their situation. And the third action was to help the auditors to get more familiarized with automatic exchange of information and to be able to properly interpret the data. As a result, the regularized assets amounted to 1.7 billion of euros, and Ecuador collected more than 84 million of euros in revenue, and it is estimated that the voluntary disclosure programs contributed to around 30% of those results. And one single case stands out. In this case, a taxpayer regularized the assets of more than 93 million of euros and paid 5.3 million of euros in taxes. So this is already a very good result, and an indirect impact of this program from Ecuador was also generated thanks to this the regularization of the foreign assets. This has resulted in the collection of more than 5.6 million of euros in the post-COVID solidarity contribution on assets. That was a tax that was created for 2022 and 23 for individuals or companies that had assets beyond a specific threshold. So beyond the impact on the income, the taxes as well, there was also the impact in this tax that was a provisional tax that was created only to respond to the impact of the COVID. So moving ahead, the tax transparency and exchange of information has enabled the tax authorities to better tackle tax evasion by putting an end to secrecy jurisdictions for tax purpose. And I'm very pleased to report to you that since 2009, when the Global Forum was established by the current format, more than 80 jurisdictions have changed their tax laws to allow tax authorities to access banking information. Legal and beneficial ownership anonymity has also ended, and it works for both entities and arrangements. So now tax authorities have access to information on the legal and beneficial ownership. The anonymity of transactions and the absence of documentation has also ended. So exchange of information has provided more tools for tax administration to enforce their laws and to make everyone contribute according to the laws. So this has restored the equality amongst taxpayers, and also it legitimized the tax authorities as a strong, fair, and trustworthy authorities. So it improved the tax morale. Having access to information also broadens the tax policy options, as more options are enforceable because the tax authorities have access to the information, so they can enforce the laws. And this potentially leads to a more equitable distribution of the tax burden. Moving ahead, I'm also pleased to report to you that the Global Forum members are reporting that more and more revenues have been raised in recent years, and this is a result of the exchange of information and related initiatives. So around the globe, more than 126 billion of euros have been identified in additional revenues, thanks to voluntary disclosure programs, similar initiatives, and offshore tax investigations. And this includes 41 billion of euros identified by developing countries. So all the members of the Global Forum are benefiting from that. Specifically, I want to flag that this includes 1.7 billion from African countries, 27.8 billion from Latin American countries, and 20.1 billion from Asian countries in additional revenue. Specifically in terms of the automatic exchange of financial account information, the benefits that the jurisdiction can expect from the implementation of these standards is not only the increase in the overall confidence in the tax system, but the implementation of these standards yields tangible and quantifiable benefits for the jurisdiction that are implementing it. And these benefits are not only for developing countries. For developed countries, it's also for developing countries. They are partaking these benefits with at least 500 million of additional tax revenues identified due specifically to the implementation of this standard. And as I mentioned before, this figure is potentially higher, as not all additional revenue have been systematically identified and reported. Also, the automatic exchange of information improves the transparency on the financial flows, and then has a key impact on the fight against illicit financial flows. We have now, in 2022, 108 jurisdictions have automatically exchanged information, and now we have 125 jurisdictions that have already committed to start automatic exchange of information by specific dates. In addition, the implementation of these standards allows for important synergies in the implementation of the standards with other forms of automatic exchanges that also enhance the potential for revenue gains. For example, I'm talking here about the country-by-country reporting, the mandatory disclosure of rulings, the reporting by digital platforms, the crypto assets framework, etc. Coming to the revenue impact in developing countries, moving to the next slide. I think one of our more relevant impact of the implementation of the tax transparency standard around the globe is its impact on developing countries. And in that direction, I want to say that I'm very proud to say the capacity building program of the Secretary of the Global Forum has been very effective. I have already mentioned the figures that have been identified by developing countries, the 41 billion of euros, but also we have more and more developing countries building a culture of exchange of information and having their tax audits, their tax investigations enhanced and strengthened by the access to information. So in 2022, developing countries sent 2,700 requests for information, and at least 76.6 million of euros in additional revenue was identified in Africa. The figures for Latin America and Asia are also on the screen, so you can see that the impact is around the globe. Also, we have seen that more and more developing countries are being in a position to implement the automatic exchange of financial account information standards. So I mentioned that we have now 125 jurisdictions that have committed to these standards, and 50 of them are developing countries. And 34 of them have already started these exchanges, and we have more and more countries that are in the process of committing. So in the coming months or years, we are very pleased to see that more will join this group. In terms of the implementation of the automatic exchange of information, for those who have already started it, the progress is very significant. The developing countries that have implemented the automatic exchange of information are receiving a massive amount of information. In 2022, information on over 33 million of financial accounts and a total value of 2.9 trillion of euros were received by developing countries. And this has translated to domestic resource mobilization of over 600 million of euros for developing countries. So these figures are telling by themselves. So it brings me to the end of my presentation. So next slide to come to my concluding remarks. I think we have seen that the information flows through exchange of information on request and automatic exchange of information have substantially increased in the past years, but the use remain uneven amongst jurisdictions, and the full potential is yet to be unpacked. Although those who have been doing so are retaining the results, the good results. The other conclusion is that two standards appear to be mutually reinforcing, allowing for the generation of additional revenues. And despite being difficult to measure the impact on revenue, the Global Forum survey has been able to identify a bit, at least the piece of this iceberg. We believe it's much bigger, but we see that the results are there, and the impact on voluntary compliance is quite difficult to identify precisely. So we need to work a bit more on this impact assessment, including by better tracking the additional revenues, because this is very important, especially for policymakers that can identify what are the benefits of these standards. So we believe that there is a good story that would continue to be told in the years to come, and I'm happy to have today here with me two panelists that can tell their own stories, Peru and Cameroon, that will share with us the benefits that they have gotten. So with further delay, I just want to thank our donors that have been showing their generosity and their trust in our program. So I think with that, I can move on to our panelists. And Palmer, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. And I will be very pleased if you could explain to us a bit why Peru has decided to implement the automatic exchange of financial account information, and also how the access to this data has enabled Peru to detect undisclosed foreign source of income, and the impact that it has had on the domestic resource mobilization. And also, if you could just walk us a bit on the importance of exchange of information on request in your strategy to mobilize domestic resource.
Thank you so much, Aida. I'm going to do my presentation in Spanish, and you can listen to the interpretation. First of all, I would like to thank the Secretariat of the Global Forum for this invitation. We have the pleasure of being able to share our experience related to the exchange of information and the importance of the tax compliance, which is the final goal for our tax authorities. We want to improve the revenue of the country. I have already prepared a presentation, which is a description of the bullet points that Zaida has already presented. So next slide, please. I have no doubt that the exchange of information and the use of that information has created a change of culture in the tax authorities of Peru. But at the same time, we have opened new opportunities for the improvement of the whole system. In the first graphic that we can see, there is a clear change in the availability of information of these operations between different parties after the report. In 2017, in Peru, we only knew that 170 companies actually had a relationship with the different parties. From 2021 onwards, we saw that 2,225 companies actually have that relationship. So we see that this is a whole new scope of possibilities for the Peruvian tax authorities and how we can evaluate all the different tax rules for these aforementioned parties. And the same has happened with the different operations. In 2017, we came to know that $5.3 billion were exchanged. Right now in Peru, we know that $136 billion are exchanged in the country. And this information has generated different challenges for the Peruvian authorities that want to take advantage of the advantages of this exchange of information and this information we had access to. In this same sense, I would like to highlight that the information that we have received through the financial report has actually allowed us to know 440,000% more of operations abroad, people that have their tax residency outside the country, and that at the same time has generated a big challenge for the Peruvian tax authorities. Before, we thought that only 1,800 people had financial activity abroad, and right now we know that 112,000 people have operations abroad.
This is an important landmark, our administration, and this because of the automatic exchange of information. What are the challenges in the Peruvian income tax return system in the recognition that prior to this exchange of information, we might have been a bit blind in regard to the data? The first thing is the challenge, comprehension about the operations and the possible faults in the income tax return system in Peru. It's not the same thing to watch an operation in the country than elsewhere. And this triggers some training capacities, entails training capacities from our staff and some expertise in order to understand, comprehend, and analyze adequately the operations they will have to handle and analyze. The second great challenge was to update the legislation, but not only that, from meeting the standards in order to reach this exchange of information. But as we would discover new in compliance modalities, we needed to adapt. As we explored the data stemming from the exchange, there were some rooms for improvement. And because we were not able to collect the integrity of the tax returns, so we created teams in order to face adequately the new operations that we were able to have access to. They are significantly larger than we used to have access to prior. Now, a challenge we face currently, and third challenge was the need to update and increase the security and confidentiality standards. And in the beginning, only the teams that generated or received the exchange of information, and then through the use of data, the need to enlarge these conditions of security and confidentiality throughout the entire administration, the IRS tributation. This is a cultural change within the administration to increase the security standards that has meant collateral benefits that are positive for the Peruvian fiscal administration, because today we are faring better than prior to this automatic exchange of information in regard to the data and the comprehension of international operations and in regard to security measures. But these year challenges enabled us to get some benefits and draw some benefits. And that's what I want to show in the next slide. Based on the data received from the exchanged information, we created specialized working teams that can assure a leverage at the CRS level to understand adequately the operations, the undergoing operations, and how they trigger an income tax return obligation in Peru. The number of exchanges and demands have increased in a significant manner, and not only because we have not just analyzed the data, but we have wondered whether these operations are backed up by the case. Sometimes we had negative results from the taxpayers and negative information. Since 2021, we requested exchange of information for more than $5.8 billion. And these operations are undergoing investigation by the tax administration in Peru. That is 1,000 times more than what we were able to know about the operations, cross-border operations. In 2023, we sent 107 information exchange requests involving $3.7 billion in operations that are currently undergoing investigation by the tax administration in Peru. What have we observed in the wake of this exchange of information and in the wake of the financial information and also of the businesses that are tied to these activities? Well, undeclared foreign sources. And so we're talking about around 100 million euros invested in this investigation process. We have found in these exchange of information requests, not real residence applications that have been presented to the Peruvian authorities in order to have access to benefits and to avoid double taxation. This investigation process, based on the information received by the exchange of information, has also revealed undervaluation cases of the import operations in order to avoid the payment of the VAT, value-added tax, and this based on a traceability system of the monetary resources that we implemented in Peru using financial information at the internal level and financial information from abroad. And this is an important case and quite significant in regard to the income tax revenues. We have found companies that have no substantial arguments to evade taxes. We have observed that the Peruvian businesses, since they have financial accounts abroad, they use those accounts instead of using the national accounts in the national banks. So we have then created a triangle tracing this information, financial triangles. We have come up with a combination using the country by country reports and the financial reports in order to discover these operations. Now, we have also found that new investment contracts are being created in order to simulate actual transactions. And that leads us to think that the investigation process, this process should go to a feedback, end up in a feedback of the information obtained and the change of behavior of the operations on the medium and long term, because they are still obtaining, and we're still obtaining the benefits of the exchange of information. And this is quite significant for the tax administration in Peru. The different events and the training programs that the ministry from the Global Forum, this has enabled us to make progress using these data. And I wanted to thank them for these efforts and for the Secretariat, and that we can tap on these data. Thank you.
Now we have with us also Mr. Roger Meyong. He's the Director General of Tax of Cameroon, and he will be sharing with us Cameroon's experience in enhancing voluntary compliance through tax cooperation. I would like to invite Mr. Meyong to highlight a bit the importance of exchange of information for domestic revenue mobilization in Cameroon, and the step that Cameroon has taken to benefit from these tools that are available to it, and also share a bit the impact of exchange of information on the tax revenues collected so far. And maybe I want to indicate also that Cameroon has just committed to a specific date to start automatic exchange of financial account information. And so it would be very interesting to hear from you, Mr. Myong, what are the steps that Cameroon has taken and what has led Cameroon to take this decision. So, Mr. Myong, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving Cameroon the opportunity to explain its strategy, including with regards to information exchange.
Thank you for this opportunity.
I would like to thank the World
So
Forum
thank you
for
to the
their
World
support.
Forum accompanying us today.
Mrs. Zaida Manetta, head of the Secretariat of the World Forum.
we must say that Cameroon
is a long-standing member
is attached
of
to the World
this forum
Forum
since
because
2012, when we
since
adhered to
2000
this
we
global
have
forum
adhered
on
to the
transparency
World
and
Forum for
information
Transparency.
exchange. In 2017,
And since 2017, we have
organized
organized
in Yaoundé
a
a
forum
plenary meeting of the Global Forum.
stemming from the World Forum.
Other than that, we also
We have
created a unit for
unit,
international exchange of information.
the National Teaching
You
Unit.
can see some of its
All the
members here
members are
today.
there.
Indeed, we consider that we want to change our tax authorities. We don't want to be a transaction administration where we manage taxes without information, to an administration centered on data, based on information exchange. In Cameroon, most big businesses are actually subsidiaries of foreign companies. And this is the reason why we request the help, the support of the Global Forum regularly to promote a compliance culture, tax compliance culture in Cameroon. In the same vein, we also try to identify a network, including for bilateral agreements. And we also became a member of the Convention on Mutual Assistance for Information Exchange of the OECD. All of these tools have allowed us to mobilize information in order to improve our company's tax compliance. We also improved our legal structure and framework with the mandatory disclosure of companies, with the registering of non-profit organizations. Every time we exchange information at an international level, we also send reports on this information exchange. We also have a central registry of beneficiaries for this information exchange. When it comes to the exchange upon request, which we are looking at the moment in Cameroon, in 2023, we have already sent 47 such requests. And these 47 requests have allowed us to generate 78 million euros, which is about 50 billion CFA francs, thanks to these 47 information requests that we've sent. And we're willing to do even more. Up until now, we have managed to send 27 requests in 2024, based on risks that we've identified. We would like to send 120 such requests this year, and we've almost reached 27. Information exchange upon request helps us in our accounting audits, in particular for big corporations. There are businesses that we've identified because there might be a risk of non-compliance. And it is with regards to all of these companies that we send requests for information to foreign countries. We also hope that in 2024, we will have an improved exchange of information to have a significant impact on tax revenues. Why is that so? Well, because it was also used as a deterrent exchange of information. I think 1 month ago, we discovered a company which was being audited. We noticed that they became aware that we sent a request for information, and they declared 8 million euros CFA francs, which is 1.5 million euros, just because they found out, they discovered that we were requesting information abroad to Switzerland. So it's also about deterrence, indeed. And this is also the reason why we exchange information. We have several cases where these requests have allowed us to improve in the situation immediately, to improve tax revenues immediately based on a tax audit. In 2023, our tax inspectors had noticed that a company was paying commissions to a company based in Switzerland. So we sent a request for information to establish that there was a dependence between the Swiss and Cameroon companies. What happened is that we obtained an answer from this request, and it has allowed us to collect almost 1.4 billion CFA francs, which is about 2 million euros. We also observed that every time we could improve tax compliance thanks to these requests. And then it changed the disclosure behavior of these businesses. We've had several cases. I had received the Secretary General of a multinational company, and I had told him that we would send a request to the country of the mother company. We suspected that there had been a case of corruption. This company was sending bribes abroad, and simultaneously, that company rectified its declaration by 250 million francs, so about 500,000 euros, almost. So there's immediate gains that we obtained thanks to these requests. But the most important point is that companies change their ways. They start disclosing because they know that we have the possibility to obtain information from abroad. This was on the impact. So let me give you the figure for 2023. 78 million euros were obtained thanks to these requests for information following fixes that were made to the disclosures of companies. So what are the next steps for us? We want to exchange information automatically. We've obtained the approval of authorities to do this, and this is why, as part of our 2024 finance law, we are now going to automatically exchange information. So authorities are on board with this because now we know the added value that this automatic exchange can bring us. We've followed the case of Nigeria, where they've made huge gains from this. So it's on a voluntary basis. It's voluntary disclosure, and it has started already. We want to be able to ask citizens who have accounts abroad to rectify their situation, and we are going to apply penalties. So this disclosure program started in Cameroon already. Many taxpayers have decided to communicate on this, and the Ministry of Finance has communicated about this, encouraging citizens to declare their income on a voluntary basis, so income that they might have obtained abroad via their foreign bank accounts. So this voluntary program should take place over 2024 and 2025. We work with our partners, including at the Global Forum, that have been assisting us in order to have this automatic information exchange by 2026. So the multilateral agreement has already been signed. Now we are working on confidentiality aspects. We've asked for the help of the Global Forum in order to obtain support for our data protection and confidentiality scheme, because we were told that this was key for automatic exchange. Then, of course, there's the IT aspect, and we're discussing this with authorities so that they can support us and we can obtain the proper IT system in order to exchange information automatically. So we need to strengthen capacities in order to get there. Sorry, I took slightly more than 12 minutes. So to conclude, I would like to thank the Global Forum for their support. We can see that these exchanges are complementary, and we would like to thus have automatic exchange of information. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayong. It was a pleasure to hear you and to hear the experience of Cameroon. Congratulations for the results that you've obtained.
I think it was very clear from both presentations that exchange of information is a journey, and that it has to be anchored in a very strategic decision of the government, of the authorities, to move in this direction. And it does not work in isolation. It has to be part of the broad strategy of the institutions. I think we heard from both speakers that it worked well because it was anchored in a solid structure and a strategy of the institution. So it's a I'm very happy to hear both of you. Otherwise, I'm going to ask a question. I'm very curious to hear from both of you a bit about the importance of developing capacity in your own institutions to be able to fully benefit from these tools that are exchange of information. And then Palmer, if you don't mind, as Mr. Myong was already with the floor, I'm going to ask him to first respond to this question about the development of capacities and the tax administration.
Oui. Pour nous, on a bénéficié de beaucoup de formations du Forum mondial. Et puis, on a des collègues qui ont bénéficié du programme de formation des formateurs. Et là, ils sont en train de former. Donc, à date, on a au moins 300 collègues qui ont été formés en matière d'échange de renseignements, parce que certains de nos collègues ont bénéficié du programme de formation des formateurs qui est organisé par le Forum mondial. Et là, on les pousse à former davantage les vérificateurs, parce qu'on veut démocratiser, n'est-ce pas, l'appropriation de de l'échange de renseignements sur demande, on aimerait que chaque inspecteur vérificateur, chaque inspecteur gestionnaire, n'est-ce pas, qui détecte un risque de non-conformité soit en capacité de, de rédiger une demande d'échange de renseignements. C'est déjà effectif au niveau de la direction des grandes entreprises. Maintenant, on veut aller dans les centres des impôts des moyennes entreprises.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meong. We are very pleased to hear that this program has benefited Cameroon and is continuing benefiting it. I'm very pleased to hear that. Palmer, maybe coming back to you, can you share with us as well your strategy to developing capacities in the Peruvian tax administration?
Thank you. The first thing I wanted to say is that the exchange of information actually is part of the great strategy to improve the compliance at the Peruvian administration, income tax return administration. This is a key element, essential to be able to cover the international operations in the framework of this improvement plan. So in Peru, the capacities have been divided in 3 pillars. The first one, the capacities of security and confidentiality of the information, a robust system to protect the data that are sent and received on both ends, because we do believe that based on these provisions, we can make progress and go ahead. I'm saying this because sometimes we can think that after going through the first evaluation, that is part of something that has already happened. This is constantly evolving.
We need to have a team that has to cover this possibility. At the same time, we have been able to have a group of directors that is fully focused on the risks, and they include all the data information. That's not easy at all. It's very complex because in the tax authorities that didn't have this capacity of receiving automatic information, we are experts in the national operations. So at that point, we needed to have a different perspective to the compliance management team for them to include these international operations. And it's in that sense that we have gone beyond in the development of these capabilities, thanks to the Ministry of Finance. And there is a third part, which is related to the people in charge of auditing. First of all, they need to acknowledge the need for the auditing systems to involve the analysis of international operations. When we find a new source of information, we are not sure about how to do it. It might take a lot of time, or maybe we don't have clear expectations of the results. So there is a process of adaptation of the staff working with us. And the second part is related to making sure that that staff actually takes advantage of all the assistance mechanisms that the public administration has available. And thirdly, they need to incorporate data in the obligations, and they need to match that information with the local tax law. So we have 3 different chapters related to capacities that are very important for tax authorities to take full advantage of these new possibilities of exchange of information. Thank you so much, Palmer.
To thank the speakers for their openness to share their experience and the lessons they have learned in this process. I think it has been in both cases a very productive journey, and I thank you very much for sharing with us, and also for allowing us, the Secretary of the Forum, to walk with you in this journey and to assist you in this process. Thank you very much for that, and I also would like to thank all those who have followed us and witnessed this experience today here. Thank you very much, and I wish all of you an end of the day, good end of the day. Bye.